What's up, people? My name is Shaggy, the opinionated hippie, currently ranking and reviewing the 31, I think is the number I came up with, Bob Dylan albums that he has released thus far. Not doing the live ones, not doing the bootleg series, not doing anything that is strictly covers. Not doing the Christmas album. I haven't even listened to the Christmas album. I will never listen to the Christmas album. I already did a C series, the 6 albums that I think are like C tier. I didn't think there were any D tier in Dylan's catalog. And so this is the B tier. These are those that I think are good, possibly great, have moments that are great, but ultimately there's something lacking in all of them that just prevents them from getting to that A. Some of them are like good enough to not be C, but yeah. So B tier albums. I think all of these are pretty enjoyable listens. When I listen to everything on this B tier, I enjoy it. I think maybe there's just a couple maybe dull spots that maybe I lose focus or start to daydream, or when I'm done with the album, a couple songs where I'm like, don't even remember what that one was about. But yeah, so that's about it. I don't think I have anything else to add about this. I started this whole channel to deal with Zappa. Why am I now doing Dylan? Flakes has a Dylan, I'm going to call it an homage. The 1988 Torture Never Stops has a Dylan homage. And this, which I still think is one of the most interesting facts ever, maybe not ever, but musically, is that Bob Dylan released his double album Blonde on Blonde 1 week before Frank released Freak Out. So the idea that two artists of such singular vision were going to put out double albums at the same time back in 1966, and Dylan beat Frank by a week. Yes, it was Dylan's not first album, where Frank's it was his debut. Kind of a different story there. But yeah, I just think that kind of has tied them together through history. And I think they both got kind of tripped up by the 80s, kind of had some more experimental stuff in the 70s where they, dipped their toes in different areas. Would have been interesting to see, knowing how Dylan sort of course corrected and killed it from the 90s on. It would have been interesting to see how where Frank went. But anyways, yeah, I guess that's enough yapping for no reason at all. Let's get on to the first of the B tier albums, and this is going to be number 25. So here we go. Number 25, Modern Times. This came out in 2006. This is a pretty critically acclaimed, I don't know. I think I have a lesser opinion than most people I know, or most reviews I've read of this. But for me, this album falls victim to something that I think a lot of Dylan albums fall victim to throughout his career, by reviewers, by history, by, if you go back and read like past Rolling Stone reviews or go online and read reviews that were contemporary to the album's release. I think a lot of Dylan albums get penalized for not being the album or the albums that preceded it. So in this case, after Dylan did the covers albums in the early 90s, had the utterly disastrous 80s, we had Time Out of Mind and Love and Theft. Two fantastic albums that were not in the C tier and are not going to be in the B tier either. And so when this one came out, to me, it's kind of in the same musical vein as those two, in that it's kind of rooted in pre-rock and roll music. There's a lot of, I think some of these songs are based on folk songs that, Dylan knows that the rest of us haven't heard. Some sort of older blues songs. He found inspiration in a lot of things that, inspired him, but much older tracks. There's a lot of just sort of like a lot of acoustic instruments, and if they're electric, they're not heavily distorted. They just happen to be plugged in. So there's I don't want to say old-timey sound to this, but there's an old-timey sound to this. And so it's that kind of Dylan, which sometimes works great. And I think the reason for me it doesn't work on this album is simply none of the tracks are like complete standouts. Like, I enjoy listening to this album. I think all the songs have their moments and are engageable, and like in the moment when I'm listening to them, I'm enjoying them. But they don't have that. There is not that one standout track that I think Love and Theft and Time Out of Mind definitely have. That this one doesn't. There are some good tracks. I think the opening Thunder on the Mountain is kind of a fun. He's dropping some contemporary names in there. That's kind of cool. I like a couple of the slower songs. I like Nettie Moore. I don't really like some of his more traditional blues sounding stuff on here. It just doesn't. The more kind of upbeat type stuff. On this album, it doesn't engage me as much as it does on some other albums. But yeah, it's not a bad album at all. I just think from my experience, it's not up to the level of Time Out of Mind and Love and Theft. And there is so much Dylan music out there that I don't need to spend time listening to this when there are other albums that are better. But when I listen to it, I really enjoy it. And it's definitely not C tier. I mean, we're probably not even B minus. We're probably a good solid B here. But yeah, yeah, that's what I think about this. Modern Times, number 25. Number 24, New Morning. This came out in 1970. This was the follow up to Self Portrait, which is not on this list yet. And Self Portrait was just bashed completely. It was sort of, we'll get into that shortly. And so I think this got some really, really awesome critical reception as like a, not necessarily a return to form, but it was something more expected out of Dylan. And I think that is maybe the vibe I get away from it, is it just seems safe in a way. It's good because safe Dylan is really good. And sometimes I think safe Dylan is incredible. There are a couple albums further on this list which I feel have a little bit of safety in them that are good, but this one, it's like Modern Times. I see why people like it. I see why it gets all the praise it does, but there's not anything that really grabs me about it. I do think, there are some highlights on it. The opening track, If Not For You, is phenomenal. The Man in Me is on this album, a song that I think is the opening credits of The Big Lebowski, but it's used in The Big Lebowski, so I think a lot of people would recognize it from that la 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 la, just Dylan lying thing. So there are some good songs, a little bit of country seeping in, I think a couple tracks. We go back to that John Wesley Harding vibe. But it's, it's a kind of a slightly eclectic mix of the normal Dylan stuff, if that makes any sense. We get a little bit of all of his pieces. So again, not a bad album. When I listen to it, I enjoy it. But other than, say, something like The Man in Me, which now has like, sort of a pop culture importance, and the absolutely awesome If Not For You, for me, nothing jumps out on this album, and it's like I have to go back and listen to this song again. But it's a good listen. Again, we're at B territory here. Just a solid, safe Dylan album. New Morning, number 24. Number 23, Infidels. This came out in 1983. I think this is the first album of like his 80s period where the sound is definitely of an era. And some of the songs, it hurts it a little bit. I think the opening track, Joker Man, I think the production hurts it for me. And I also think it is a bad opening number. I think this album would have been stronger if Joker Man had not been the lead-off track. I don't know why. It just doesn't work for me. It's a strong album. Again, we're solid B right here. The songs are good. The songwriting's good. There's some bad production choices, but they're nowhere near as bad as some of the ones that would come later on down the line. There are some memorable songs. Sweetheart Like You, I think, is good. I think, is a fantastic song. Union Sundown, he's getting a little political there. The closing, Don't Fall Apart on Me Tonight, is a nice album closing song. Neighborhood Bully is kind of silly. Man of Peace is a little, but it's a solid album. It almost sounds like it's a little too polished, a little too studio shiny at times. I think, as we have found out on recent releases, when you get different versions of this or live versions of these songs, like they sparkle and they pop a little bit more. So I think the songwriting is there. This is definitely some of his strongest material of the 80s, at least from here on out. But again, it's an 80s album. I think this is the first that I would call of Dylan's 80s period. And the songs are great. it's an enjoyable listen, but I don't walk away from this going, man, I gotta go back and hear that song. And I almost think that everything else, literally everything else on this list, has at least one song from this point on that I'm like, man, I gotta go back and hear at least that one song. This, I think, is the last of the albums that doesn't have that moment. Infidels, 1983, number 23. Number 22, Rough and Rowdy Ways. This is his most recent album. It came out 3 days before my birthday in 2020, June. Had I made this video a year ago, this definitely would have been an A tier album. Might have been an S tier album if I made it 18 months ago, because this came out, it was summertime, it was stupid hot here in Texas, and the world was shut down, so there was no place to go. So we listened to a lot of music, and this was a perfect late night or laze around the house or chill out or just vibe kind of album. And so I loved it for like a year, and then I kind of stopped listening to it as much, and it's kind of fallen off in recent half year. And I don't think some of the songs are as strong as I originally thought they were. It's kind of just becoming a really, really, really good album instead of the incredible album I originally thought it was. But there's still some fantastic stuff on here. I love the opening track, I Contain Multitudes. Really low-key, bare-bone number. False Prophet is a fun, bluesy number. I like Crossing the Rubicon. And Dylan's longest song of all time, 16 minutes and 54 seconds, is on this album. It's inspired by the Kennedy assassination. It is Dylan's way of commenting on Kennedy assassination. He specifically gets into the details of that. It's your typical, I think it's couplets, or it's, typical Dylan, lots of forced rhymes in there and some, okay, how'd you arrive at this? But it's Dylan's thoughts for like 17 minutes. He name drops about like 100 different songs or artists or just musical experiences. In a way, it reminds me of LCD Sound System's Losing My Edge, in which there's all these references to just music, only Dylan's not trying to be purposely obscure and elitist, as the point of Losing My Edge was, but he's like, remember Only the Good Die Young, remember Twilight Time, and he's just like name dropping artists and songs and The Who and Acid Queen and just Glenn Frey and Don Henley by name, just goes on and on and on. So that's pretty interesting. He's like clearly like he wants to share his love of music with everybody once again. There's something of a sitting on the porch on the rocking chair, kind of recounting the past type, like if this were his last album, this would be an amazing way to go out type song, type vibe. And as an album experience, even though Dylan is one of those artists that have embraced CD technology to his deficit, I think, personally, a 45-minute album is the perfect length for any album, if you ask me. I'm old school that way. Give me 2 sides of 22 and a half minutes, and you've made the best album. Dylan likes to pack his CDs with like definitely over an hour's worth of music, and sometimes I think that is a hindrance to the overall album. I think it is somewhat of a hindrance to this album, but as an album listening experience, the opening I Contain Multitudes, which is kind of stark, to the closing just almost 17 minutes commentary on like American culture for the past 60 years, it's a great journey. And it's your modern Americana, pre-rock and roll Dylan playing that kind of music, that kind of vibe, and his whole husky new sort of Dylan new millennium voice. So yeah, it's a solid album, and I would have ranked it much higher a year ago, but I think it's coming back to where I think it naturally should be. But a solid B, almost a B plus. Number 22, Rough and Rowdy Ways. All the tired horses in the sun, how am I supposed to get any writing done? Number 21, Self Portrait. I wanted to get this into the top 20, but I couldn't do it. 1970, this album was hated, bashed, reviled, just bombed in the best way possible. I was going to say bombed miserably, but it bombed remarkably. Not sales-wise. Sold a lot of records. Critics hated it. And growing up, when I was like, had a internet did not exist, and you had to like be careful about how you spent your hard earned money. I had no interest in ever hearing this because I never read anything but the worst reviews ever. It wasn't until I found this at a used CD store in like my late 20s that I picked it up and I was like, what? These people are crazy. This album is amazing. So, double album, a whole bunch of covers, some old folk songs, some blues numbers. Blue Moon is on here. One of the things that does not work. He covers Paul Simon's The Boxer, another thing on here that does not work. But he covers Early Morning Rain by Gordon Lightfoot. I think that works. There's an amazing cover of a song called Days of 49, which I think is the highlight of this thing. I'm assuming it's a folk song. Great performance, great coverage, great energy. But the first song on the album is, it starts off with these female singers singing that, all the tired horses in the sun, how am I gonna get any writing done, right? Dylan doesn't even appear on the song. Dylan wrote the song and wrote those lyrics, but he does not actually sing. He sings everything else. There's also some live tracks on here, like a Rolling Stone, in an arrangement that I really enjoy. Kind of some dirty sound, not the best sound quality, but the energy is good. There's a Mighty Quinn, Quinn the Eskimo. There's a She Belongs to Me. Really good energy with all these tracks. But that opening track, How Am I Going to Get Any Writing Done? When this came out, people were like, what is going on? What is this? What happened to Dylan? Is he trying to piss us off? Why is he making a bad album on purpose? Dylan in later interviews, I think, said something along the lines, someone asked him why it was a double album, and he was like, well, if you're going to make a bad album, you might as well really just go for it and embrace it all. Something along those lines. But anyways, that first song, like, is that not a statement of purpose? Like, that is your thesis statement. All the tired horses in the sun, how am I going to get any writing done? Writer's block. He was experiencing it. He wanted to make an album, so he covered a bunch of songs that he loved, threw in a handful of originals that he had left over, put in some great live tracks. Why was it confusing? Why did people bash this? Why did people act like they didn't understand Dylan? It is the most I don't get thing in the history of rock and roll as far as I am concerned. Like, maybe now in like 2022 hindsight, where artists can freely go out and like do an acoustic album or like be weird and do something, we're like, well, that's an interesting detour. Let's see how they go after this. And it's almost like accepted, or like we want artists to do that. Neil Young's been doing it for so long that who cares what Neil Young does? It's Neil Young. Radiohead has the right to do whatever they want. We're going to go, oh, Radiohead. But back then, I guess it just didn't happen, because when I finally heard this, I loved it. And then I loved it even more about 10 years later. I think I heard it in my late 20s. So that was like, late 90s. But then I think it was the mid 2000s when Bob Dylan had his theme time radio hour on XM radio, which he curated and hosted. It was pretty much, there would be a theme, cars. And Dylan and Bob would come on and be like, everybody loves those cars, and they really love fast women in their cars. This is a 1932 song about fast women. Who's the fastest woman in your life? And then they'd play a song. And then he'd come out and introduce another song. And Gary Newman also loves cars, only he likes synthesizers too. And then they play Cars, something like that. But that's what this album feels like. It's like Dylan was like, I'm going to curate a bunch of songs, only instead of playing other people's songs, I'm going to perform them myself. I don't get it. It is a great album. It is a fun album. Yes, there were some bad spots on it. There are some odd choices. There's some really cheesy stuff, a couple covers that don't work, but the failures make the risks all that much better. This probably should be higher than 22. I'm feeling bad for putting it this low, but I'm sticking with it. 22, Self-Portrait. This is a good album, people. Don't be a hater. Embrace the failure. I don't know, whatever. 22, Self-Portrait. 20, Saved. Obviously, Self-Portrait was 21. Can't even read my own writing. Self-Portrait, 21. Saved, 20. This is the second of his born again Christian gospel religious albums. This came out in 1980. Did I already say that? I think this is the weakest of the three, obviously, as it's the first one on this list. However, I really, really like this period. This is like a B plus. We're like these next, what do I have, 4 more on this list? This and 3 others. These are all B plus solid albums. I don't understand the hatred. I guess if you utterly cringe at lyrics about being born again and about Jesus and about being saved, like the title track, or about needing a solid rock, or about pressing on with the help of the Lord. If any of those things bother you, if gospel music bothers you, if gorgeous, just beautiful gospel singing in the background at almost every point bothers you, yeah, you're not going to like this album. But all 3 of these albums, I think, have so much energy. Dylan seems so invested. His singing seems, whether you like it or not, so full of character and passion. The arrangements are fun. The energy is good. I do think that, again, modern times, if an artist all of a sudden did this kind of like genre shift, we would be a lot more accepting than they were back then. Maybe the religious thing is a possible reason. I'm not religious myself, so there's nothing about the words or the music or the gospel aspect that attract me because of who I am as a person. I just think Dylan sounds like he's having a blast, and obviously he's passionate about this. And yes, he's preaching, and yes, he's pretty much telling me I'm damned for all time because I am not born again. But I'm okay with all that. I accept it. I think these are fun albums. I think this is the weakest of the 3. Both of the other 2 have just some stellar standout tracks. But I do think Pressing On in particular is a particularly different style Dylan song that works really well. And this entire album, opening with the very gospel-y, kind of choiry, not a loud but a slowly building gospel opener, and then closing with just a rowdy gospel number. The journey itself is fantastic, and it's a really fun listen. You just have to be able to like be confident in who you are and not get bothered when Dylan preaches at you and preaches at you hard. But Saved, number 20. It's a good B plus album. Number 19, Shot of Love. This is the 3rd of his religious trilogy, though some of it definitely bleeds over into Infidels, and there's definitely a very big red flag on Street Legal, the one that precedes the first of the 3. This has 3 outstanding stellar tracks, but for the most part, it's very much a sequel to Saved, very gospel-y, starts off with like a typical build up the energy gospel number, closes with a much more, almost like he knows this is the end of his religious period, because the closing number is just one of those beautiful ballads that albums should all close with. Every Grain of Sand, just some of his most like, it reminds me of, this is a song that I wish Dylan had said the Grateful Dead need this, because this to me, Every Grain of Sand, always reminds me of a Jerry song, like just one of those like Standing on the Moon, like those just anthemic second set, just post drums Jerry songs where he's just like making these like a almost, or an encore number, even like a Black Money River, Broke Down Palace, just one of those like, I'm making these grand statements about life. And this is sort of Dylan's version of that sort of Robert Hunter mystique. And I think he captures that well on Every Grain of Sand. Groom Still Waiting at the Altar is on this, just a fun rocker. Heart of Mine is one of those sort of breezy, I Want You type songs that Dylan does so well. The 80s sound is definitely starting to seep in here. I don't think it is as egregious as it would be on Infidels and everything after that, but there is a little bit of tinniness or thinness to some of the songs that they could have better, fuller, fatter production. But for the most part, this is just a great album. Probably the only song that I don't like is Lenny Bruce. There's a song about Lenny Bruce, of all things. But there's a song on here called Property of Jesus, which is a fine, really good song. Like, Dylan is full on, still in full preaching mode. But it almost feels like he's a little happier now. Like he's not as angry. He's coming to terms with it. The whole album has sort of a, I'm going to absolve myself of the need to like preach at you all. This will be my last effort. I'll end with an absolutely beautiful song, and then we'll go on from here. So, looking back at his career, this very much feels like the third in a trilogy. It's better than the second, not as good as the first, but if you like the gospel stuff, if it doesn't bother you, if you don't mind being not as harshly preached at, this is a really solid B plus album. Shot of Love, number 19. Number 18, Street Legal. This came out in 1978. This is another album that I think falls victim to it's not the albums that preceded it, namely Desire, and then Blood on the Tracks, then the Basement Tapes. So we had quite a streak going once again. And then this comes along. This is in no way a bad album, but this definitely is a safer album, a Dylan maybe trying to get radio hits, though there isn't anything that radio friendly on here. There's definitely some Springsteen influence in the form of saxophone playing. I don't generally like saxophone in rock pop numbers. I don't like Clarence Clemons' good sax sound. I think the worst part about Springsteen is Clarence Clemons' sax sound, not his playing, not his abilities, the actual sound of his saxophone. What we have here on this Dylan album is a B tier Clarence Clemons, so that intent is there, but it never succeeds. But the writing is so incredibly strong in this album, and I think some of the melodic hooks are so catchy that I'm willing to overlook absolute horrible saxophone playing. The opening changing of the guards has this great like call and response the entire song where it's like Dylan will sing a line like 16 years, and then this backing vocals are like 16 years, just the entire thing as he weaves all these weird tales. There's like half the songs are like straight up story songs. Senior, A Tale of Yankee Power is on here. There's solos on here. I think most of the time in Dylan songs, when musicians get a chance to step up and like show off their stuff, it's like Dylan's like, when I finish singing, you have 22 seconds before I sing again, do something. Where this one, it's like, oh, you have an actual solo spot. Still only 22 seconds long, but I actually want you to like come up with a catchy little solo. I think there's 3 solos on the album. The second song, New Pony, has a really good just electric guitar solo. New Pony is the one that has the red flag. I got a new pony. His name is Lucifer. Something like that. Lucifer gets dropped early on this album. So we're like, whoa, where'd that come from? Well, now we know. There's a slide guitar solo, a short slide guitar solo at one of the latter songs on the second half. And the very last song, Where Are You Tonight? That's what it's called. Yeah, Where Are You Tonight? Closes with an ending jam, essentially. Is the guitar solo is kind of long, and the song just kind of fades out on that solo jam at the end, and it's really tasty and it's really nice. It's almost as if Dylan was listening to Springsteen and maybe some Dire Straits. I'm sure he was listening to Dire Straits as Knopfler would all of a sudden appear on like half of his albums for the next decade, or whatever. Someone will fact check me on the Knopfler thing, but he is on his albums. But yeah, this is just a really solid album, undermined by some bad production, just some bad, just trying to maybe be a little more mainstream. It feels like a comfortable late 70s rock / pop radio friendly album, but it's Dylan's version of it. So there's amazing stories, and I think his singing is amazing, and he does have there's a lot of good energy to it, a lot of good intent, and it's just a really enjoyable listen. And the first song, I think, is catchy as hell, and the last song ends on an absolutely amazing note. And anytime you can start and finish on highs, the rest of it just sounds better in between. So yeah, this is a really solid. What is this? Number 19. No. Man, number 18, Street Legal. And number 17, Planet Waves, the last of the B tier albums. This is as B plus as you could possibly get. This is one good song away from being an A minus. This is an album, came out in 1974. It is with the band, so it sounds phenomenal. If you like the band, sort of understated, not overpowering, but always doing their job and doing it well. vibe that they do. One, I wish the band had never broke up. Two, I wish Dylan and the band had formed sort of a Neil Young Crazy Horse type thing where like every 4 or 5 years they get together and just put out another ridiculously good album and have fun and just like revisit kind of the same sonic territory, but with like whatever Dylan's now bringing to the table as far as lyrics go. That would have been amazing. But I think this is just a feel good, really good, fun album. Opens up with On a Night Like This. Really fun song. Tough Mama is on here. I first heard that, knew that through Jerry Garcia. And I don't think I got this album till I had seen it. Caught Jerry Garcia Band doing this several times in '90 at the Warfield. Was going to school up in Berkeley, so saw a lot of Jerry Garcia Band shows, and he was doing Tough Mama in the '90s. Missed the LA version that year because I was in Europe seeing the Dead. So '90 was a good year for music for me. But anyways, Tough Mama, a great Dylan Band song. That's one of my all-time favorites. One of the reasons I love this album. There's two versions of Forever Young, a slow and a fast. On the album, I think the slow version closed out side A and the fast version opened up side B. I've only owned the CD. I don't own the album for this, so I've always heard it back to back, use slow and fast. Perfect way to do it, slow and then fast. And it's kind of fun to hear the different sort of interpretations of them. You know, the same band doing the same song in two different ways. It kind of works. Closes with a song called Wedding Song, which I think is just Dylan, a guitar, and a harmonica. There might be two acoustic guitars. Maybe he's double tracked. I think it's just him on guitar. I'm not good at picking up those kind of things. But one of his best all-time songs, a top 10 song to give away a list that will eventually be coming. Dirge is on here. Dirge, the name works. It's not as dirgy as an actual dirge, but it reminds me of the Rolling Stones, kind of the stuff they would have on like a Moonlight Mile or a Sister Morphine, or that kind of like slow burning, ominous type, just a little bit uncomfortable feeling that the Stones were really good at doing in like the first half of the 70s. It has that kind of vibe. It's a simpler number, definitely more of a bare bones thing on this, but it is just, I think, one of his most beautiful, one of his most haunting. It is without a doubt like the heart and soul of this album. And it is kind of unexpected. It kind of like doesn't really jibe with a lot of the energy of the rest of the album, but it works perfectly anyways, because it's just such a powerful song that its energy just like, it almost as if it like you need the lighter stuff surrounding it because it's so just perfect. Not as intense as the title suggests. Definitely not a Sister Morphine type thing, but there's definitely a vibe in this that's a lot just, a very neat Dylan vibe that I don't think you find in too many Dylan songs. Dirge, one of the definite. As strong as side A is on this album, side B with that dirge in the middle of it and closing with the Wedding Song, is just absolutely almost a perfect second side. But yeah, the end of side A, maybe there's a couple tracks after Tough Mama. Not a big fan of Hazel, that are just not forgettable, but just not as strong. But the strongest B plus you could ever have. Number 17, Planet Waves. I was going to say Planet Dreams. Planet Waves. That's it, people. Those are my B tier Dylan albums, not to confuse them with yours. So yeah, I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff I forgot to say about those, but I was trying to keep this brief. I'm not good at that, but I tried. Anyways, let me know why I'm wrong, why I'm right, where I messed up, what you like better than I don't, what you don't like better than I do. You know how all those things work. You know how comments work. Comment like crazy. Let me know your thoughts on Bob Dylan. We have 16 albums left. We got an A tier and an S tier. And we got all eras represented. I'm excited to look at this list and realize we got something from almost every era. Except the 80s. I don't think the 80s is anywhere represented in this list, but everything else is. Yeah. All right. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching. All that kind of stuff. Comment, subscribe, like, spread the word. Don't spread the word. Be true to who you are. You know how it works. And
We got a Dylan quote to close this one out with? No, we don't. But all the tired horses in the sun. You know the drill. All right, peace. Bye, y'all.